The letter in Benedict Yarrow's hand began with the word thief, underlined 3 times, and it only got worse from there. He stood on his porch in the morning light, reading the cramped, forceful handwriting that accused him of everything short of burning villages and stealing children. According to the writer, one Asha Redbrook, he had purchased land that included a strip of her family's grazing meadow. The meadow where her grandmother's goats had grazed for 40 years. The meadow that was rightfully, legally, and morally theirs. The meadow he had stolen through either incompetence or malice, and she demanded he return it immediately or face consequences. She did not specify but implied with great enthusiasm. Benedict read the letter twice, then walked to his fence line and looked at the land in question. A narrow band of good grass ran along the western edge of his property, marked clearly by the surveyor's stakes. His deed described it. His money had bought it. He owned it. He wrote back that same afternoon. His reply was brief and factual. He had purchased the land legally. The survey was accurate. The deed was filed. If she had concerns about the boundaries, she should take them up with the land office in town. He signed it politely and sent it with the mail coach. Her second letter arrived 4 days later and was even angrier than the first. This one called him a bureaucrat and a coward. It explained in painful detail how survey stakes could be moved, how officials could be bribed, how newcomers always seemed to end up with more than they paid for, while families who had worked the land for generations got pushed aside. She wrote that she had expected nothing better from a human, but she had hoped he might prove different. Clearly, she had been wrong. Benedict sat at his kitchen table and stared at the letter. The insult about being human stung more than he wanted to admit. He had bought this land precisely because it was far from town, far from the suspicious looks and muttered comments about orc lovers that had followed him after he had defended an orc merchant from being cheated. He had wanted peace and a place to work. Instead, he had inherited a feud. He wrote back again. This time his reply was shorter. The land was his. The matter was closed. He suggested she accept reality and move on. Her third letter arrived with remarkable speed, as if she had been waiting by the road to hand it to the mail coach. She wrote that accepting reality was what people did when they had no honor or spine. She wrote that her family had 3 goats and 12 chickens, and that strip of meadow was the difference between keeping them fed through winter or losing them. She wrote that he probably had plenty of land and was simply greedy. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, that if he had any books about crop rotation, she would appreciate borrowing them, since if he was going to steal her meadow, he might as well make himself useful. Benedict read that last part 3 times. Then he laughed despite himself. He wrapped up his copy of Morrison's Agricultural Practices and sent it with the next mail, along with a note that said the book was a loan, not a gift, and he expected it back in good condition. She sent the book back 6 weeks later with pressed flowers marking the pages she had found useful, and a letter explaining in great detail why Morrison was wrong about legumes. The letter also called Benedict stubborn, short-sighted, and possibly illiterate, given that he apparently could not read a survey map correctly. He wrote back defending Morrison and pointing out that she was the one who had asked to borrow the book in the first place. He also noted that if she was so certain the survey was wrong, she should hire her own surveyor instead of simply insisting she was right. She replied that surveyors cost money, which she would have if he had not stolen her meadow. The pattern continued. She wrote angry letters about the land. He wrote back with calm refusals. Somewhere in the midst of the argument, other things crept in. She mentioned that the winter was hard and her roof leaked. He suggested using pine tar and sent instructions. She wrote back that the pine tar worked but that he was still a thief. He asked if she had tried planting turnips in the north field. She replied that turnips were cattle food and she was not cattle, then admitted 2 letters later that the turnips had grown well and made decent soup. By spring, her letters came every week. They were still angry, still demanding he return the meadow, but they were also full of other things. She wrote about her mother's illness, about the fox that kept getting into the chicken coop, about the traveling merchant who had tried to cheat her, and how she had chased him off with a rake. Benedict found himself waiting for the mail coach, found himself thinking of things to tell her. He wrote about the apple trees he was planting, about the barn roof he was repairing, about how quiet the house felt in the evenings. Her midsummer letter mentioned that she had been reading a book of poetry someone had left at the market. She said most of it was foolish, but there was one poem about the moon that she kept coming back to. She copied it out for him in her careful handwriting, then added that he was still a thief and she had not forgotten. Benedict read the poem a dozen times. He wrote back asking what she thought the poet meant by the line about silver roads. He also sent a copy of another poem he thought she might like. He did not mention the meadow. She replied 3 days later with her interpretation, which was completely different from his and probably more insightful. She said he had terrible taste in poetry, but decent taste in turnips. Then she asked if he ever felt lonely out on his land with no one to talk to. He wrote back that yes, sometimes he did. He asked if she felt the same. Her next letter said that she felt lonely often, that her mother had died in spring and the house was too quiet now, that her father had passed years ago and her brothers had moved away to find work in the South, that the goats were good company, but they were not much for conversation, that she appreciated having someone to write to, even if he was a stubborn thief who refused to admit when he was wrong. Benedict's reply was the longest he had written. He told her about his own family, about the fever that had taken his parents and sister when he was 17, about the years he had spent working other people's land before saving enough to buy his own, about how he had imagined having neighbors, a community, maybe even a family someday, about how most people did not want orc neighbors or human neighbors who did not mind orcs. He told her he was sorry about her mother. He told her the letters had become the best part of his week. He did not hear back. A week passed, then 2. Benedict checked the road every day. He asked the mail coach driver if there was anything. Nothing came. He told himself she had simply tired of the correspondence, or perhaps she had been offended by something he wrote. Or maybe she had finally accepted that the meadow was his and wanted nothing more to do with him. The 3rd week, he started a letter to her 3 times and threw each attempt into the fire. What was there to say? He had been writing to someone he had never met, someone who hated him, or at least hated what he represented. It had been foolish to think it was anything more than an argument between strangers. The 4th week, he stopped checking the road. The 5th week, he woke with a fever and chills that left him shaking in his bed. At first, he thought he could work through it. He made it as far as the barn before his legs gave out. He crawled back to the house and barely made it to bed before darkness took him. Time became strange. He woke and slept, unsure which was which. The fever painted his walls with shadows. He dreamed of letters written in fire, of green skin and small tusks, of a voice calling his name. Once he woke certain someone was in the house. He called out, but only silence answered. When he finally surfaced with a clear head, the light through the window was wrong. Too golden, too slanted. He sat up and the room spun. His mouth tasted like ashes. His body felt hollowed out. He made it to the kitchen and found evidence of the days he had lost. Moldy bread, sour milk. A pot of soup he did not remember making, now fuzzy with growth. The calendar on the wall said 3 weeks had passed. 3 weeks. Benedict looked out the window at his fields and felt his heart sink. The wheat was overripe, starting to shatter in the wind. The garden was choked with weeds. The barn door hung open, creaking. The apple trees he had planted were drooping from lack of water. He tried to walk to the barn. He made it halfway across the yard before he had to sit down in the dirt. His hired hand had left a month ago to help his own family. Benedict had planned to manage alone for a season. He had not planned on this. The sound of hoofbeats brought his head up. A horse and rider were coming up the road at a pace that kicked up dust. Benedict squinted against the sun, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The rider was small but sat the horse like someone who had grown up in the saddle. As they got closer, he saw green skin, pointed ears, small tusks that caught the light. Asha Redbrook pulled her horse to a stop 10 feet away and stared down at him. She was younger than he had imagined, maybe 20, with black hair tied back in a practical braid. Her clothes were travel-worn and her dark eyes were furious. "You stopped writing," she said. Benedict tried to stand and failed. "I was sick. For 5 weeks, 3, maybe 4. She dismounted in one smooth motion and crossed the space between them. Up close, she was smaller than he expected, the top of her head barely reaching his shoulder, but she moved with the confidence of someone twice her size. She grabbed his arm and hauled him to his feet with surprising strength. "You look like death," she said. "Thank you." That was not a compliment. She half carried, half dragged him back to the house. Inside, she looked around at the wreckage of his kitchen and made a sound of disgust. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday, maybe." "What did you eat?" "Bread." The moldy bread. It was not all moldy. She said something in Orcish that he suspected was not flattering. Then she sat him down at the table and started opening cupboards. She found eggs, some potatoes that were starting to sprout, a jar of honey, and some dried meat. Within minutes, she had a fire going and food cooking. Benedict watched her move around his kitchen. "You rode 2 days to get here." "Obviously. Because I stopped writing." "You stopped writing, and you are too stupid to have done it on purpose, which meant something was wrong." She cracked eggs into the pan with more force than necessary. "I thought you might be dead. You came to check on me." "I came to make sure you had not sold my meadow to someone else." He smiled despite himself. "The meadow I stole." "Yes, that one." She pointed the spoon at him. "Eat this slowly. If you vomit, I will be very angry." The eggs were good. So were the potatoes. He ate slowly as instructed and kept them down. Asha ate standing up, watching him with an expression he could not read. When they finished, she cleared the plates and then walked through the house, inspecting everything with a critical eye. "Your wheat is ruined," she said when she came back. "I know. Your garden is full of weeds. I know. Your barn is a mess and something has been getting into your grain stores. I know." She crossed her arms. "Do you have a plan for fixing any of this? Get better. Hire help. Work twice as hard for the rest of the season. Stupid plan. You can barely stand." She looked at him for a long moment, then shook her head. "I will stay for 2 weeks. I will help you harvest what can be saved and get the farm back in order. In exchange, you will sign over the disputed meadow to me." Benedict blinked. "That seems like an unfair trade." "You are the one who stole it in the first place." "I did not steal it. 2 weeks of help for 1 strip of meadow. Take the offer or do not." He should have argued, should have pointed out that the meadow was his by law, should have told her to leave. Instead, he said, "I want the letters back." She went very still. "What? Your letters, all of them? That is my price for the meadow. Why would you want those? They are mostly insults." "Yes," he said, "but they are also honest and funny, and I like them." Asha's cheeks darkened, which he had not known was possible with green skin. She looked away. "Fine, the letters for the meadow, 2 weeks of work, then I go home and we are even. Even." She held out her hand. He shook it. She put him back to bed and told him to sleep. When he woke, it was dark and the smell of cooking filled the house. He found her at the stove, making some kind of stew with vegetables from his garden and the dried meat. She served it without comment. It was the best thing he had eaten in weeks. The next morning, she woke him before dawn. "If I am going to save your harvest, you need to tell me what to do." He gave her instructions from the kitchen table, still too weak to do much more than walk around the house. She listened carefully, asked smart questions, and then went out to work. By midday, she had cleared half the garden and watered the apple trees. By evening, she had started cutting the wheat, working with a scythe like someone who knew what she was doing. "You have harvested before," he said when she came in for dinner. "My father had land, before." She did not elaborate. The days fell into a rhythm. She worked from dawn until dusk, and he recovered by degrees. By the third day, he could walk to the barn. By the fifth, he could help with the lighter work. She did not slow down for him, did not coddle him. If he fell behind, she told him to rest. If he kept up, she said nothing. They spoke in fragments. She asked about the land, about what he planned to plant next season. He asked about her family, about the house she lived in alone. Neither of them mentioned the letters. On the 8th day, he felt strong enough to help with the wheat. They worked side by side, cutting and bundling until his arms ached. When they stopped for water, she looked at him and said, "You should not push so hard. I am fine. You look tired." "I am always tired during harvest." She frowned but said nothing. That evening after dinner, they sat on the porch and watched the sun set. The air smelled like cut grass and dust. Crickets sang in the fields. Asha leaned against the railing, her eyes on the horizon. "Why did you write back?" she asked suddenly. "To tell you the meadow was mine." "No. I mean, why did you keep writing? After the first few letters, you could have ignored me." Benedict thought about it. "You were interesting. Angry but interesting. And I liked arguing with you. You liked being called a thief. I liked that you were honest. Most people are not." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I liked writing to you too, even though you are stubborn and wrong about everything." "I am not wrong about everything. You are wrong about Morrison and about the survey." "The survey is accurate, Asha." She looked at him sharply. It was the first time he had used her name out loud. "How do you know?" "Because I checked it 3 times before I bought the land, and because I had it verified by a second surveyor last fall." Her expression shifted. "A second surveyor?" I wanted to be certain. "The results matched." He hesitated. "But I can have it checked again if you want, by someone you choose." She stared at him. "Why would you do that?" "Because it matters to you, and because if there was an error, I want to know." Asha shook her head slowly. "You are the strangest man I have ever fought with." "Is that a compliment?" "I have not decided yet." They hired a new surveyor the next day. Asha chose him from the land office, a tired-looking man with careful hands and a reputation for honesty. He spent 2 days walking the property, checking the original stakes, consulting the maps. When he finished, he called them both over to the disputed strip of meadow. "The original survey was in error," he said simply, "by about 40 feet. The eastern boundary should run along that line of rocks, not the fence posts. The meadow belongs to Miss Redbrook's family claim." Benedict felt something in his chest loosen. "You are certain?" "Yes. The original surveyor marked the wrong landmark. An honest mistake, but a mistake nonetheless." He looked between them. "I will file the correction with the land office. The deed will be amended." After the surveyor left, Benedict and Asha stood in the meadow together. She was very quiet. "You were right," he said finally. "I am sorry. You did not know. I should have checked sooner, should have believed you." She shook her head. "You checked twice." "Most people would not have checked at all." She looked at him. "Thank you. For what?" "For listening. For caring enough to find out the truth." They walked back to the house together. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. Benedict felt the weight of the year settling around them, all the letters and arguments and small confidences. He felt the presence of something unnamed, something that had grown in the spaces between anger and honesty. "Your 2 weeks are almost up," he said. "Yes. Will you go home?" Asha stopped walking. "Do you want me to?" "No." The word came out more forcefully than he intended. He took a breath. "No, I do not want you to go." "Why not?" "Because I like having you here. Because the house feels less empty, because he stopped, unsure how to finish. She waited. "Because somewhere between thief and bureaucrat, I fell in love with you," he said quietly. "And I know that is foolish, and I know you probably hate me, but it is the truth." Asha was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I do not hate you. No, no, I did at first. But then you sent the book, and the poem, and you kept writing even when I was awful to you." She looked down at her hands. "I have never had anyone care about my thoughts before, about what I read or what I believed. You made me feel like my words mattered. They do matter. I know, now." She met his eyes. "When you stopped writing, I was terrified, not just worried, terrified. Because I realized that somewhere between arguing about Morrison and talking about the moon, I had fallen in love with you too." Benedict felt his heart stutter. "You love me." "Yes, you idiot." "Why do you think I rode 2 days to check on you? You said it was about the meadow." "I lied." He laughed. And then she was laughing too, and then somehow they were kissing, her hands in his hair, his arms around her waist. She tasted like the honey from breakfast and the dust from the road. When they pulled apart, she was smiling. "I am keeping the meadow," she said, "I know. And I am keeping the letters. You said I could have them back. I lied about that too." He kissed her again. "I want to share the meadow," she pulled back. "What? The meadow and the farm?" "And the house." He took her hands. "I want you to stay, not for 2 weeks, permanently. Marry me, Asha." Her eyes widened. "Benedict, I know it is fast. I know people will talk. I know it will be hard." He squeezed her hands. "But I have spent a year falling in love with your words. I want to spend the rest of my life falling in love with the rest of you." She was quiet for so long he thought she would refuse. Then she said, "Yes, yes, yes, I will marry you on one condition, anything. You admit that Morrison is wrong about legumes." He laughed and pulled her close. "Morrison is completely wrong about legumes. Good, then we can get married." They were wed a month later in the small chapel in town. The ceremony was simple, attended by the few neighbors who did not care about mixing species and the merchant who had sold Benedict his land. Asha wore a dress she had made herself, dyed green to match her skin. Benedict wore his best shirt and could not stop smiling. Afterward, they walked back to the farm together, hand in hand. The harvest was in. The meadow was officially shared between their 2 properties, the fences removed so the land flowed from one homestead to the other. Asha had moved her goats and chickens over the week before, and they had spent the previous evening combining their households into one. That night, they sat by the fire, and Benedict brought out the bundle of letters. All of them, tied with string, creased from reading and rereading. "I thought you were keeping these," he said. "I made copies." She leaned against his shoulder. "I wanted you to have the originals." He untied the string and opened the first letter. The word thief was still underlined 3 times. He read it aloud, and Asha groaned. "I cannot believe I wrote that. I can. You were very convincing. I was very wrong. You were right about the meadow, eventually." She took the letter from his hands and looked at it. "These are evidence of a year I spent being angry at a man I had never met." "Why would you want to keep them?" "Because they are also evidence of a year I spent falling in love with the person behind the anger." He kissed her temple. "And because someday, when we are old and sitting on this porch, I want to read them and remember how we started." Asha smiled and settled deeper against him. "We started with me calling you a thief. Best beginning I could have asked for." They sat together as the fire burned low, reading through the letters one by one. Outside, the wind moved through the meadow that now belonged to both of them, and the stars wheeled overhead, bright and infinite and clear. The years that followed were not always easy. There were bad harvests and hard winters. There were people in town who refused to speak to them, who crossed the street rather than acknowledge an orc woman married to a human man. There were moments of doubt and struggle and fear. But there were also good years, abundant harvests, seasons of plenty. There were neighbors who came around slowly, drawn by Asha's fierce loyalty and Benedict's quiet kindness. There were evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over their shared land. There were arguments about books and farming and everything in between, but they were the kind of arguments that ended in laughter rather than anger. 3 years after their wedding, Asha gave birth to a daughter with green skin and her mother's dark eyes. They named her Flora, and she grew up running through the meadow, chasing chickens and climbing apple trees. She learned to read from her father's books and learned to argue from her mother's example. 5 years after that, a son arrived, strong and loud and endlessly curious. They named him Brennan, and he followed his sister everywhere, asking questions that never seemed to end. The house filled with noise and life and love. The children grew up with stories about how their parents had met. Flora loved hearing about the letters, about the year of arguments that had led to love. Brennan wanted to know about the meadow, about the survey and the mistake that had brought them together. "So you were both right," Flora said one evening when she was 12, sitting on the porch with the old letters spread out around her. "Your mother was right," Benedict said. "I was just stubborn." "You were both stubborn," Asha corrected. She was older now, her hair streaked with gray, but her eyes were still sharp. "But yes, I was also right." Flora laughed and picked up one of the letters. "This one is my favorite, the one where you tell him he has terrible taste in poetry. He does have terrible taste in poetry." "I introduced you to poetry in the first place," Benedict protested. "Which proves my point." They sat together as the sun set, 3 generations sharing the porch. Flora read the letters aloud, her voice carrying across the meadow. Brennan listened, shaking his head at his parents' younger selves. Asha leaned against Benedict's shoulder, the same way she had on their wedding night, and he wrapped his arm around her. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Benedict and Asha remained on the porch. The stars were bright overhead, and the crickets sang in the fields. It was peaceful in a way that felt earned, built from years of work and love and choosing each other every day. "You ever think about how different things could have been?" Asha asked. "If the survey had been correct from the start, sometimes, but then we never would have written to each other. True, you would never have known I existed, and you would never have known I had terrible taste in poetry." She laughed and squeezed his hand. "I am glad the survey was wrong. I am glad you wrote me angry letters. I am glad you wrote back." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars. The meadow stretched out before them, shared and tended and loved. The house behind them was full of sleeping children and years of memories. The letters, carefully preserved, sat in their place by the hearth. "I would do it all again," Asha said quietly. "Every angry letter, every argument, every moment." Benedict pulled her closer. "So would I." And there, on the porch of their shared home, with the meadow spreading out before them and the stars wheeling overhead, they sat together. 2 people who had started as enemies and become everything to each other. 2 people who had built a life from anger and honesty and love. The wind moved through the grass, carrying the scent of growing things. Inside, the children dreamed. The goats settled in their pen. The chickens roosted in the barn. Everything was as it should be. Benedict looked at his wife, at the woman who had ridden 2 days to find out why he had stopped riding, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. She met his eyes and smiled, and he knew she felt the same. They had started with angry letters and a disputed meadow. They had built something neither of them had dared to hope for. A home, a family, a love that had grown from the most unlikely soil and blossomed into something neither of them would ever take for granted. The night deepened around them, but they stayed on the porch a while longer, wrapped in each other's warmth. There would be time enough for sleep later. For now, there was only this moment, this peace, this life they had made together. And in the house, tucked safely by the hearth, the letters remained. Evidence of where they had started, proof of how far they had come. A reminder that sometimes the best things in life begin with someone calling you a thief and meaning it.